Consciousness in Quantum Field Theory, Bridging Science, Philosophy, and the Vedic Perspective. Consciousness in Quantum Field Theory. The discovery of the field, this is a quote from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi from The Science of Being and Art of Living. The discovery of the field of this one basis of material existence will mark the ultimate achievement in the history of development of physical science. This will serve to turn the world of physical science to the science of mental phenomena. Theories of mind, intellect, and ego will supersede the findings of physical science. At the ultimate or extreme limit of investigation into the nature of reality in the field of the mind will eventually be located the state of pure consciousness. Now, here at MIU, our physics department, we're actually starting an Institute for Physics, Consciousness, and Veda. It's a research institute, and it will be devoted to investigating the most advanced findings of theoretical physics and understanding them on the basis of the Vedic insight that consciousness is fundamental. Now, I just came across this quote, which is attributed to Werner Heisenberg. Heisenberg was the inventor of quantum mechanics, and he said that the first sip from the cup of natural science tends to make one an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting. And this theme of integrating science and spirituality really guides our research at Maharishi International University. And we're very fortunate to have Professor Hagelin as the director of our research group. And our department is really booming. It seems to be that the interest in physics and consciousness this is really the time, and we're getting flooded with inquiries, and the challenge is for us to follow up on all the leads. But I believe that the physics department will soon be one of the strongest departments at MIU. For centuries, physics has operated under the assumption, born of pragmatic decisions in the 17th century, that consciousness and mind are irrelevant to understanding the material world. This assumption gradually hardened into full-blown materialism. I'm going to talk a little bit about materialism in this talk. Materialism has become the dominant prevailing paradigm in science and throughout the culture, with devastating effects. This is not to suggest that one can't be a materialist and an atheist and be a decent person if they were brought up properly, they have good habits. Of course they will be a decent person, but statistically, the intellect is very powerful, and if you're a materialist, then the refined values of moral sensibility and one's connection to the divine, it's not there to support you. And I believe Raj Vedam is going to be talking about the cultural implications of this devastating worldview. It's not an accident that Karl Marx started from materialism and he progressed to a philosophy that has caused untold suffering in the world. That's why I think the work of the World Association for Vedic Studies is so important on an intellectual level. The intellect is very powerful, and correcting those mistakes and finding the deep importance of our own consciousness and its connection to the totality is hugely important. it's also important for science. There hasn't been a major breakthrough in theoretical physics in 50 years since quark theory in the 1970s. And that, I believe, is because the materialist paradigm has put blinders on theoretical physics, which MIU is uniquely positioned to correct that. And I believe important advances are going to come from our department in the coming decade. According to materialism, matter is primary in consciousness and everything that goes with consciousness, cognition, finer feeling, caring, as Rajaram, Dr. Tony Nader has been emphasizing. These are all a byproduct of brain activity. The idea is that our consciousness and cognition don't have any causal efficacy of their own. They're just passive byproducts of neurons firing in the brain. Just on the face of it, that is a very odd, any physicist would find that a very odd theory, that something could be a passive byproduct causally affected by neurons firing in the brain, but having no causal efficacy of itself. But there are more serious problems, and I'll get to those in a minute. Now, this view, materialism, did enable remarkable progress in science in the 17th century. The great geniuses of modern science, Galileo, Descartes, made a kind of truce with the religious authorities of the time and said, you guys stop. Galileo, as you probably know, was put under house arrest for advocating that the Earth went around the sun. And Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake. So anyway, the scientists said, listen, let's make a truce. The church can be responsible for subjectivity in the soul, and science will be all about the material domain. So that kind of truce worked for a while until materialism has become its own kind of religious dogma. And any of us who went through graduate school and told our professors that we didn't adhere to the materialist paradigm, in fact, that we were transcendental meditation teachers, that didn't go over so well. So theoretical, yeah, so all right, let me tell the story of, probably many know the story of Nachiketas and Yama. This is from the Katha Upanishad. This picture shows Yama, the great god of death and immortality, at the bottom of the picture, and his devotee Nachiketas. This is when Nachiketas is grown up. But the story starts when Nachiketas was a 12-year-old boy. And Nachiketas' father was doing performances for the gods, and Nachiketas noticed that his father was using spoiled milk and grains that were rotting and not using his best stuff for the ceremony. And Nachiketas was trying to give his father a hint that he should be using his best thing. So he said to his father, "Father, to whom will you offer me?" And his father understood what Nachiketas was implying and flew into a rage and said, the American vernacular of what the father said would be, go to hell. But the literal words were, go to Yama. And Nachiketas, being a dutiful son, wrapped up a little packet, and he heard that Yama's house was in the south of India. So he got on the road, and 3 months later, he found Yama's house in the south of India. He knocked on the door, and a servant came, said, "What do you want?" And he told the servant that he wanted to see Yama, and the servant said, "Well, Yama's not here, you'll just have to wait on the porch." So he waited on the porch for 3 days, And then finally, he saw Yama coming riding on his water buffalo, which was Yama's preferred mode of transportation. And finally, Yama came and said, "What are you doing?" And so Nachiketas explained that he was waiting to speak with him. And Yama was very concerned. "Oh, I am so sorry that we didn't show better hospitality. To try to make it up to you, I give you 3 wishes, anything you want, and I will do my best to fulfill it." So Nachiketa said, "Well, my first wish would be that my father and I will be reconciled." And Yama said, "No problem. When you go home, your father will be so happy to see you, and everything will be fine. What's your second wish?" And Nachiketa said, "My second wish is to learn the fire ceremony. I understand that burns up karma and enables me to evolve very quickly to enlightenment." So Yama taught Nachiketas the puja. And Nachiketa was very happy. "What's your third wish?" And Nachiketa said, "I want to understand what happens when we die. Is the materialist right that we're nothing but the brain and that when we die that we're gone, poof, that's it? Or does the soul go on?" Yama's answer, I will try to give in modern form, informed by the best science that we have today. So this is my talk today. This is my endeavor to say what I believe Yama would have said or had said. So first, the Vedic concepts. Jiva is the individual soul that animates a living being. It's a reflection or manifestation of Atma, the universal soul. Atman is the universal, eternal, and unchanging self or soul beyond the limitations of time, space, and causality. Brahman is the totality, the ultimate reality underlying all that there is. Now, pure consciousness is actually Brahman, and we first encounter pure consciousness when we practice transcendental meditation. Transcendental meditation allows the mind to settle down and experience pure consciousness as transcendental consciousness. That's our first glimpse of Brahman, and it gets stronger and stronger as we continue our practice. Now here's the chariot metaphor. The chariot represents the body, the driver is the intellect, the reins are the mind, and the horses are the senses. Now, of course, we have 5 senses and 5 organs of action. This artist thought it would make the picture too crowded, so he only showed 4, but we are to understand that there are 5. Now, we have the gross physical, we have the subtle domain, and we have the transcendental pure consciousness. Their reality is layered. That, as I understand it, is the Vedic conception. The materialist thinks there's only the gross, which is the tip of the iceberg, much, much smaller than even what I show here. Now, there are layers of the subtle body. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, the 5 sheaths surrounding Atman, there's Annamaya Kosha, that's the food body. Our dining hall here is called Annapurna, which means literally full of food. And the food body is the gross body, including the brain. Pranamaya Kosha, prana is the life force. Manamaya Kosha is mind, or the subtle body. Vijnanamaya Kosha is the intellect, and Anandamaya Kosha is the ego. Now, Maharishi said that when one transcends, he actually thought that transcending might apply when one is first learning to meditate, but it's not really leaving behind anything, it's an expanding. He said, I was thrilled when I read this in Gaudapada's Karika so many years ago that the mind in samadhi, transcendental consciousness, does not get extinct, it expands. Gaudapacharya says in his commentary on Mandukya Upanishad, pracharasa tu vigaya, the mind in samadhi expands, and thereby he establishes Brahmi consciousness, Brahmi Chaitana, not a state of transcendence, but a state of expanded awareness. In other words, nothing is annihilated, nothing is gone. It's an expansion of our understanding of who we are and always have been, thereby implying the practicality of action and behavior and experience, very thorough and most profound in that state of Brahman consciousness where the mind is expanded. It doesn't get extinct, it gets expanded. The jiva becomes Brahm. It doesn't mean the jiva gets lost and extinct, but it only expands. It's expansion of individuality, which is desired of the state of Vedanta. Now, Plato, I'll talk a little bit. This morning we benefited from Rajiv Malhotra's talking about the different strands of the Vedic tradition. There's Shaivism, there's Buddhism, there's Advaita Vedanta. They are all aspects of the same totality, different perspectives on it, but they're all the same. In this talk, I will talk a little bit. Those themes are in Western thought too. Some of the greatest of the Western philosophers, namely Plato, and I'll also talk briefly about Immanuel Kant, who was also a scientist. Plato said, he was talking about reincarnation. Someone would not seek what he knows, if he already knows it, for since he knows it, there's no need of the inquiry, nor what he does not know, for in that case he does not even know what he's looking for. Thus the soul, since it is immortal and has been born many times, has seen all things both here and in the other world, has learned everything that is. So we need not be surprised if it can recall the knowledge of virtue or anything else which it once possessed, for seeking and learning are in fact nothing but recollection. This will come to an understanding of what we're doing in our physics department when we're studying physics. We're not studying laws of nature that are out there beyond us. We're actually studying deep cognitive structures in our own consciousness and getting more refined and exact and precise understanding of what those are. That's what physics is. In the interest of time, I'll go as quickly as I can. So here in a nutshell is the materialist perspective. So you'd have a source of light, it shines on the object of perception, the photons go into the eye of the observer, they trigger her retina, and that sends electrochemical signals down the optical nerve. They end up in the visual cortex, which is in the back of the head. There are 25 layers of the visual cortex. And then somehow, and the neuroscience textbooks are a little vague here, but there's a little call-out bubble, and she has a subjective experience. Now, how that subjective experience comes about. Now, there are a lot of bad ideas. If you find yourself in the woods and see a cute little bear cub, it will be a bad idea to pick it up and play with it, for obvious reasons. Now, materialism is one of those bad ideas, and let's see why. I'll go. I think you all know what materialism is. So, okay, what's wrong with materialism? First, there's the hard problem of consciousness. This term, the hard problem of consciousness, is due to an Australian philosopher named David Chalmers. I saw Chalmers speak at a conference. He's also a musician, and he had a little group that played in the evening, and they had a song, and the refrain was, "Consciousness, we have no clue what it is." But whatever it is, it's not what the materialist thinks. The hard problem of consciousness, in a nutshell, says even if neuroscience someday can map every neuron in the brain, how it's electrochemical signal go from one neuron to the next and get to the motor cortex, which is in the parietal lobe. Is that right? What? Top of the brain, yeah, okay. And that triggers the muscles. Now the hard problem of consciousness says even if neuroscience could map every signal in the brain, it won't explain why we are conscious, why we have subjective experience. Where does that come? Why is it needed? That's the hard problem of consciousness. Today I want to talk about what could be called the harder problem of consciousness. Somebody might have already grabbed that. I'll have to think of another label, maybe the hardest problem of consciousness. Anyway, materialism is not only wrong, it's conceptually incoherent. Why? Conceptually incoherent. Now, I came across this argument when I was an undergraduate and was taking a course on Immanuel Kant, one of the three greatest philosophers in Western philosophy are Plato, Aristotle, and Kant. And Kant was also a scientist. There is a theorem named after him in astrophysics. We cannot possibly conceive of a reason as being consciously directed from outside in regard to its judgments. Kant is notoriously dense, and I'm going to go through this awfully fast, but I'll try to make it as clear as possible. So we cannot possibly conceive of a reason being an intelligent human being, us, as being directed from outside with regard to its judgments, directed, say, by neurons firing in the brain. If we became convinced that our cognition and consciousness are just epiphenomena, passive byproducts of neurons firing in the brain, and those neurons firing direct us to think what we think, then the subject would attribute the determination of his power of judgment not to his reason, but to an impulsion. If you follow that logic, then our reasoning is not because of some insight into logic, validity, rationality, correspondence to reality, truth. Our cognition is due to neurons making us think what we think and think it's convincing. Reason must look upon itself as the author of its own principles independently of alien influences like neurons firing in the brain. In other words, intelligence must be primary. There's no way to make intelligence derivative on something else. Now, William James, who was the greatest psychologist around the turn of the 19th century, late 1800s, early 1900s, Darwinian evolutionary theory was still new and had made a huge impact, and James emphasized that if our consciousness and cognition are epiphenomena, if they're passive byproducts, and they don't have any causal efficacy, then natural selection will not have selected for truth, validity, rationality, or any of the cognitive principles that we pride ourselves on that make science possible. We'd just be robots with subjective experience floating on the top. The nervous system has evolved to support the organism's ability to survive and reproduce. If there's danger, we have to fight or run away, gather food and propagate the species, but you don't need to be having true cognition for that to happen. You just need neurons firing to make your muscles contract and get out of the way of danger. What's happening in our mind doesn't have to be related to the real world in any way whatsoever. the nervous system has evolved to support the organism's ability to survive and reproduce, but the cognitive content of our thoughts is irrelevant if it's just epiphenomenal. Now, the greatest philosopher of religion of our time is Alvin Plantinga. I actually corresponded with him about 10 years ago. He's quite elderly now. He wrote in his book, Where the Conflict Really Lies, he said the supposed conflict between science and religion is superficial. The intelligent design is where science and religion can converge. The conflict really lies between science and what he called naturalism, which is materialism plus atheism. He said, and here's the question, what reason is there for supposing that the belief content is true if the materialist is right and belief content is just passive byproduct of neurons firing? There isn't any. The neurology causes adaptive behavior, which Darwinian natural selection selects for, and also causes or determines belief content. But there's no reason to suppose that the belief content thus determined is true. All that's required for survival and fitness is that the neurology cause adaptive behavior. This neurology also determines belief content, but whether or not that content is true makes no difference to Darwinian fitness. Now, this is devastating. In auto mechanics and fundamental philosophy, both, you have to pay attention, otherwise you're going to have disasters. And materialism has run itself into a disaster, because if you can't trust the content of your belief to be true, your thinking to be valid, rational, logical, that undermines not only logic and reason, it undermines science, which the materialist prides himself on being the epitome of scientifically rational, and it undermines the materialist's own arguments. So materialism undermines its own foundations. It's not only wrong, it's conceptually incoherent. It's intellectually bankrupt. And if any of you can think of any other adjectives I can heap on, let me know. What's the alternative? The alternative is consciousness is fundamental. So the first main point, materialism is conceptually incoherent. By undermining logic, rationality, truth, and science, materialism undermines its own foundations. It's not just incorrect, it is fundamentally self-contradictory. Attempting to explain consciousness through materialism is like trying to understand waves without recognizing the ocean that gives rise to them. Just as the ocean is the silent source of all its waves, the dynamic expressions of consciousness emerge from the unbounded, self-interacting field of pure consciousness, the unified source of all knowledge and existence. Now, I have a lot more to tell you. Oh, the transmission model, the idea that the brain doesn't produce consciousness the way the materialist suggests, but it actually filters consciousness. Maharishi said once very intriguing, something that I found extremely intriguing. He didn't elaborate, but he started to say that there are two nervous systems, or maybe you can characterize it as two styles of functioning of the nervous system. And let me explain what I think Maharishi meant. Now, this is my commentary on Maharishi. I have very esteemed colleagues, and I don't know if they agree with me or not. Anyway, here goes. I think the brain does two things. One, its function is to filter out higher consciousness. Otherwise, we would be overwhelmed. And in our life as little small self human beings, if all of that higher consciousness were to flood through, we would not be able to function. So the brain has evolved to limit or restrict higher consciousness, including fundamental intuition, higher cognition, and even all that goes with higher consciousness: gratitude, love, appreciation. Instead, an inordinate amount of our daily activity is governed by the needs of the body to survive. Fear, anxiety, how are we doing in relation to other people in our group? Are we okay? Do they approve of us? How are we going to be ostracized? All these day-to-day surface level thoughts. That's because until we evolve sufficiently, we can't handle higher consciousness all at once. Some of it we have, our ability to love, our ability to appreciate, to be grateful for what we have. So that's one of the functions of the brain. The second function is it's as if natural selection said, okay, I took away your higher consciousness, including your, what Rajiv Malhotra was calling non-computational intelligence, our ability to just know instantly, immediately, and reliably. I've taken that away from you, but I substituted a primitive neural network, not as powerful as the computer on your cell phone, but it will get you around. So those are the two styles of functioning, I think, that the brain has. And if I had time, I'd go into the transmission model of William James, that the brain filters, limits. It picks up the signal from higher consciousness and transduces it into bodily speech and action. It doesn't produce consciousness. So let me, here, what do we need the nervous system for? So we're here to learn lessons. Dr. Hagelin has been talking lately about the subtle body, and deeper than the subtle body is the causal body. The causal body contains the deepest themes that we keep on repeating until we learn the lessons that we need to learn and evolve, and then the causal body evaporates and the need to reincarnate is not there anymore. Let's see, how am I doing? Is there time for a joke, maybe? Okay. Okay, there were two friends. They went to the movie theater together, and before the movie came on, there was the trailer, or preview. And the preview was a guy on a motorcycle. He was barreling along, and there was a tree with a low-hanging branch, and it looked like the guy was going to hit his head and get knocked off his motorcycle. And that's where the preview stopped. And you didn't know if he was going to veer at the last minute and save himself, or he was going to get knocked off. So the two friends made a bet, whatever it was, $100. Did he get knocked off or not? So they went in, they watched the movie. He's coming along, he gets knocked off his motorcycle, and there he is lying on the ground. So after the guy who lost paid up, and the guy who won said, I have to admit, I cheated. I already saw this movie, so I knew what was going to happen. And the guy who lost said, I have to admit, I cheated also. I already saw the movie too. So the guy who won said, well, why did you bet that way? And so the guy who lost said, well, I thought he would have learned by now. So eventually we will learn the causal body will no longer need to be there. And what happens if we are still here on Earth and the causal body is gone? It's replaced by cosmic purpose. We still have something to do. And whatever it is, take care of our family, love our spouse and children, establish a great research institute at MIU, create 10,000 groups and save the world. Whatever it is, we have to do it. So near-death experiences, Maharishi Vedic science. Oh, there is one thing I want to... Now, I want to talk a little bit about Fred Travis, our great neuroscientist at MIU, and this brain integration scale. Dr. Travis found all of these little dots, each one represents a subject in the study, and he correlated their reports of subjective experience, whether they were having pure consciousness along with waking, dreaming, and sleeping. That's an indication of progressing towards enlightenment. And he correlated that with EEG parameters. There were three that he noticed, F3, F4, broadband EEG coherence. The subject, when they have a little cap on their head with electrodes, I don't know if it's 19 or 32 electrodes or whatever it is, each one is carefully mapped by neuroscientists, and F3 and F4 are frontal lobe, and so there is coherence between those. I want to talk a little bit about the simple choice C and V scores. That's contingent negative variation. And contingent negative variation seems to correlate with subjective experience of higher consciousness. What is contingent negative variation? You have a subject sitting in front of a computer. He gets a warning signal that something's going to happen, and then a few seconds later, he gets a choice. Is this number bigger than this number, or this number is bigger than this number? And he's got to press a button, and so he's got to make a decision. Now, in that gap between the warning signal and the choice, that's where the contingent comes in. He's got to make a choice. There is a negative variation. For somebody who's not highly evolved, they get excited. They've got something to do. They're going to have to make a decision quick. But the more highly evolved experiences, there was a negative variation. The brain seemed to settle down. To my mind, that's consistent with the transmission model, that the brain's function is to shut out higher consciousness. Now, if you're highly evolved enough to handle higher consciousness, you want the brain that's blocking higher consciousness to settle down, and you're mobilizing your intuition to make the right decision. That's my interpretation of it. So I talked about that. Maharishi's actually talks about the transmission model pretty directly, and the third day of checking after you learn transcendental meditation, he uses the metaphor of the sun shining everywhere the same, but it's reflected differently in different glasses of water. Pure consciousness is there, it's universal, and the nervous system is like a glass of water. It might be muddy, it might be clear. It reflects the consciousness. It doesn't produce the consciousness like the materialist says. Okay, the two-style functioning, the transmission model. According to the transmission model, the brain does not generate consciousness but acts as a filter, often inhibiting higher awareness and cognition. Reducing brain noise may allow deeper, more expansive consciousness to emerge. Just as the sun's reflection varies with the clarity of water, individual consciousness reflects universal consciousness to differing degrees depending on its purity. Now let me jump ahead because there's one last thing. I want to tie this to advanced physics. So I'm sorry you have to miss all this. You'll have to come here and study with us. I've got all this great knowledge to impart and so little time. Okay, the Maharishi effect. This is now our own higher consciousness. One of the manifestations in the brain EEG is coherence. Now, there also seems to be something, actually sociologists talk about social coherence. There seems to be a connection which is non-local between our own transcendental experience and the surrounding society. They don't have to be transcending. They don't have to be meditating. And yet they will be benefited and the quality of life will improve. Here is a study mapping. The blue is a group practicing an advanced transcendental meditation program called the TM Cities program. And the green is the quality of life. They match almost perfectly. When the numbers of meditators together increase, the quality of life also increases. And this is a study that Dr. Hagelin led in Washington, D.C. I was in that group. And when the numbers were high, the numbers practicing the TM cities together were high, then the crime rate went down. And here is a group of meditators practicing the TM City program together. Now, what's the explanation? We don't have time to watch this. So I'll just talk about quantum entanglement. We think it has to do with quantum entanglement. Everybody knows about quantum entanglement, systems that have interacted and then are separated. They could be separated along, wrap it up, 30 seconds? Okay, a couple of minutes. Okay, they could be separated by long distance, and if you make a measurement on one, it will collapse the wave function of its partner, no matter how far they are apart. Now, is that the basis of transmitting the Maharishi effect? Coherence from our own psychology to the wider population. Is it a form of quantum entanglement? We believe it is. And how would that work? Because if you have a single system, two particles that are entangled, if you make a measurement on this one, it has maybe a 50-50 chance of being found spin up or spin down. You don't know how the wave function is collapsed, so how would you use it to send a signal? But if you have a pre-measurement, you can collapse the wave function prematurely, and that can show up and be detected and transmitted. You can make the decision whether to pre-measure or not. And let me, okay, this. Okay. I'm going to run through a very interesting, profound experiment called the Delayed Choice Quantum Eraser. And I'll tell you why I think that is a model for what's happening in the Maharishi effect and the actual objective experiment. It's not clear yet, and it's not clear for an interesting reason, and I think we already have those cities' abilities, non-local abilities, in our own psychology. Okay, here's the beginning of the experiment. You're all familiar with the two-slit experiment. This is a simplified version. It's called the Mach-Zehnder apparatus. Now you have a laser that's spewing out photons. You have a beam splitter that splits the beam, so half the photons go the upper route, hit a mirror, and they are deflected to the detection screen. Half of them go the lower route, and they recombine, and they interfere with each other, creating the familiar interference pattern, just like in the two-slit experiment. Now you can slow this down so that the laser is just emitting one photon at a time, and that single photon is a wave in the field. It's a field, and it goes both paths and recombines with itself, and that determines the amplitude, the probability that where it's going to land, and you get the interference pattern. Now, what if we revise the experiment? Here's where it gets interesting. Instead of mirrors recombining the beams, we're putting crystals called down converters. A down converter absorbs a high energy photon, say a blue photon, and it emits two photons with half the energy, say two red photons, that are entangled. Now the photon that continues on its path to the detection screen at the end is called the signal photon. The photon that goes up to the detector is called the idler photon because it's not directly detected at the end of the experiment. But if you put a detector to measure the idler photon, here's the thing. It collapses not only its own wave function, but the wave function of its entangled partner, the signal photon, and you lose the interference pattern even though the detector up there or to the left doesn't interact with the signal photon locally at all. It's the knowledge of which path the signal photon that collapses its wave function, and that can be non-local. Now, how do we use this to send a signal? Notice that you can make the idler photon path very long so that it hits its detector after the signal photons have already landed at the detection screen. This detection at the particle detectors in the upper left corner collapse the wave function of the signal photon and force it to have no interference pattern. They all land in a clump at the center of the detection screen. Even though the particle detectors detect the entangled idler photons after the signal photons have already landed. And here's the final interesting. What if you put beam splitters in the path of the idler photon? So then the idler photon going along the upper route has a 50-50 chance of being deflected to the particle detector at the top or the particle detector at the left. So now when your particle detector clicks, you don't have which path information. This erases the which path information by putting those beam splitters in late in the path there. Now here's the thing. You can decide to put the quantum eraser beam splitters in or leave them out. You can make a choice. And by doing that, you're sending a signal non-locally, instantaneously, and it can even be backwards in time. I'm excited about this. This can be research that would make the AI revolution look like child's play. Now, John Kramer, who was a physicist at University of Washington, actually got a grant from the government to do this experiment. We're talking about a delay of a fraction of a microsecond. Unfortunately, it was a tabletop experiment, and the result on the detection screen was obscured by decoherence, noise, entropy. He couldn't tell whether he had an interference pattern or not. And the interesting thing is, everybody now who's working with quantum computers knows that in order to avoid decoherence interfering with your signal, quantum signal, you need to get very, very cold. If you go to Fermilab, they will show you their experimentation. It's all about low temperature experiments. And the thing is, Dr. Hagelin is explaining to us that the subtle body is already at very cold temperatures. So even though it would be hard to do this and make it work, we'd have to get a couple $1 million for our research foundation. But we already have those abilities. Some people more than others. The nice thing about science, modern science, is that it makes things reliable, repeatable. So we want to get this into the realm of modern science, and this is one of the experiments that I hope we will one day be able to do for real and do it properly. All right, so I know Raj Vidam is getting annoyed with me, so I will wrap it up here. Okay. Materialism is conceptually incoherent, not just incorrect, it is fundamentally self-contradictory and unable to account for the nature of consciousness and cognition. This presents a fundamental challenge for physics. How did the mind and other aspects of the subtle domain interact with the material world? This suggests that advanced physics may already be probing the frontiers of subtle energy physics, offering a bridge between consciousness and matter. Transcendental consciousness, beyond the limitations of material experience, pure consciousness is a self-aware field of infinite intelligence. It is the silent, unbounded source from which all mental and physical phenomena emerge. Impulses within the transcendental field, within this field of pure consciousness, the fluctuations or impulses arise as the fundamental vibrations of nature's intelligence. These impulses manifest as the subtle structures of mind and energy, linking the unmanifest source to the dynamics of creation. Wholeness moving within itself, this is Brahmi Chaitana, this is unity consciousness. At the highest level of cognition, wholeness, pure consciousness, interacts with itself, giving rise to all forms of reality while remaining eternally self-referral. These self-interacting dynamics embody unity, fully integrating consciousness, energy, and matter. I have more jokes to tell, but you'll have to talk to me later. Thank you very much.